Hey guys, welcome to the Asian Hustle Network podcast. My name is Brian.
And my name is Maggie.
And we interview Asian entrepreneurs around the world to amplify their voices and empower Asians to pursue their dreams and goals.
We believe that each person has a message and a unique story from their entrepreneurial journey that they can share with all of us. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Asian Hustle Network podcast. Today, we have a very special guest with us. His name is Bernard Moon. Bernard is a co-founder and partner at SparkLabs Group, which is a network of accelerators and venture capital funds that has invested in over 300 companies across 6 continents since 2013. Previously, he was co-founder and CEO of VidQuick, a web conferencing and sales solutions platform. Bernard was a managing director at the Lunsford Group, which is a private investment firm with holdings in real estate, healthcare, and other industries. Bernard was co-founder and VP of business development of Going On Networks, a social media platform for companies, and also led their product development, where Business Week recognized them in their Best of the Web list. He serves on the advisory boards to Seoul National University's Graduate School of Data Science and Nanyang Technological University's Ecolabs, Center of Innovation for Energy. Bernard, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Bernard, you are so impressive. Like just looking through your bio and your LinkedIn and everything, you want to hop right into it. What was your upbringing like that helped influence you to become the person that you are today?
Well, I grew up in suburban Chicago in Northbrook, and my parents definitely had a strong influence on me. They were both entrepreneurs, right? They basically, I mean, to be frank, it wasn't like a hard path for them, but what they did is when they immigrated, like someone like my mother, she had to completely change jobs or careers, right? She was in medical school in Korea and on her way to be a doctor. And then she married my father and they moved to Chicago and she switched to a CPA. Oh, wow. So what was interesting is that she was actually one of the first Asian American immigrants that obtained her CPA license in the state of Illinois.
Oh, wow.
And then eventually her and my father started doing small businesses in Chicago. Like first they did like a chain of beauty supply stores, right? Then they moved on to like luggage. And then they eventually looked into bringing some US franchises to South Korea. So they eventually obtained the rights for Glory Jean's Coffee, which back then in the 90s, it was like the second largest coffee chain in North America after Starbucks. Wow. Took it there, and then eventually they grew it to 12 stores and sold it. But the first influence is interesting that my parents had on me was the fact that they're very active in the community, not just the Korean American community, but the overall, I guess, Chicago community. Right, in various nonprofit activities. So that's what spurred my first interest when I got to college. When I went to Wisconsin, I became very politically and socially active. And then during college, my mind was set on not like running for office or being in politics, but being involved in public policy. Right, so that was my first love. So,
well, I mean, we do have to highlight Arby's, you know. Want to hear more about that first experience that you had at Arby's, because it's so unique, you know. And yeah, I think for me, it's like one of my first jobs too, was like working at a restaurant. So like hearing this story is like, there's a correlation. So before we dive into the fellow, I want to hear about the Arby's story.
Yeah, it was during my going into my senior year. My close friend Heyman was like, "Hey, I need a summer job. Do you want to work with me at Arby's?" I'm like, sure. Right. So we both worked there. I mean, we actually got on the same shift and everything like that. And I think it was a good experience because, you know, you're definitely on the ground floor doing everything from cleaning the restaurant floors to all like the greasy, if you've been in a restaurant, all the greasy stuff in the back to obviously making sandwiches. And the funny thing is I already loved Arby's before, but I heard from friends that worked at other fast food chains after they worked there, they wouldn't eat there again. Right. But Arby's, after I worked there that summer, I was like, oh, I trust the food. So I still eat at Arby's and I have faith in it. So
That sounds great. Sorry,
amazing.
off tangent, but we still want to hear quickly about that story.
Yeah, humble beginnings. I love it.
But yeah, I'm kind of curious too, like, as your parents being entrepreneurs, what did it teach you about failing, about taking chances, about success, because these are the type of values that are pretty unique to having guests on our podcast too, because a lot of us are afraid to like take this chance and, move from the traditional path to the untraditional path, but you've done the untraditional path your entire life and you've been very successful at that. So what kind of core values did your parents preach into you about taking chances and trying new things?
Yeah. And on top of that, we noticed that your parents were in a few different industries, trying out different, things to do. So I think a lot of people have this, misconception going into entrepreneurship that they have to like nail it down right. And then they're going to live with that company for the rest of their lives, right? And they have to do it perfectly. But it seems like your parents were, very versatile. They wanted to try out different things. So talk a little bit about how that kind of shaped your mindset as well going into entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think first, I'm compared to, that wave of immigrant parents. I mean, one, I was in Chicago, so I think it's a little different than if you're Asian American and you immigrate to New York or LA. Mm-hmm. The dynamics of Chicago is slightly different. I mean, you do obviously hang out with a lot of other Asian Americans, but it's not, as I would say, like a closed loop. Like, I have friends that grew up in LA. All they do is hang out with like Korean Americans or Chinese Americans or whatnot. It was a little more sort of diverse in that way. And then, just learning from my parents, first of all, they grew up speaking to me in English, right? Mm-hmm. Which I would say maybe like less than half of my peers, they had their parents speak in English, right? And then they always emphasize really going into the mainstream, right? Mm-hmm. And that sort of set the groundwork of them even being just open about everything. So when they were doing businesses, they'd be open about, this is really struggling, right? Or, oh, this one, we tried this, but we had to shut it down, right? Actually, I remember, I could say it now, it was so long ago. They actually started trying to do like, in between some of their ventures, they try to do a laundry service for hotels, like a commercial laundry service, right? But some aspects didn't work out well. And so they actually quickly learned to shut it down within a year. Wow. Right. Then they moved on to their next thing. So I think I wasn't thinking about it at that time, but that helped me sort of build resistance and almost like a thick skin towards failure. Mm-hmm. Right. So I learned from them indirectly that, failure is okay. And that's how you sort of learn and move on. Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really important. I think like the key takeaway there is knowing when to let go, right? And then knowing when to kind of put your foot on the gas pedal. And, if you know when to let go, then it's a really good sign that you know what you're doing because, there could be other opportunities that are just waiting for you out there. Definitely.
Yeah, let's dive deep into your first getting involved with politics, getting involved with activism. And how did that lead you down the path of eventually becoming an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist like you are today?
Well, yeah, so I definitely don't have a traditional career path. I think, it's definitely convoluted, right? I was interested in government and public policy. So after I graduated from University of Wisconsin, I went to work for the governor of Illinois at that time as a low-level lobbyist. And my objective actually at that time was, hey, if I find that I could work in this environment and not become jaded, right, then I think I could stay within this career path. And, I saw a lot of things behind the scenes, even as a low level person, just because I think I had good access, good mentors at the time. Mm-hmm. Definitely the world of state and local politics is very corrupt in various ways. It's good too. A lot of people, there's a handful of people that are looking out for good, mm-hmm. but then there's also a lot of people that are just trying to sort of, grease their own wheels and just be part of a machine, right? And so it was interesting just seeing the dynamics of politics, especially related to a city like Chicago, right? Mm-hmm. It's definitely old school politics. And then, you see a lot of old practices that have probably been around for over 100 years.
Oh, wow.
So after that, I found out about this choral fellowship. So I decided to apply, and luckily I got in. At that time, they only took 48 people nationwide. Wow. It's a very strong alum of current and former congressmen and senators, right? And a lot of people that are active in politics and government. So I got in. At that time, there was 4 locations, and I got into the St. Louis Center. So I moved to St. Louis for a year. It was a very intense program. I still say that it was the second best career experience for me after my first startup, right? Because we're literally for this, it's interesting for a public policy fellowship. I was working like 70, 100 hours a week. It was very project oriented, and they put you in different sectors of government. Different sectors of society, not just government. So it was like you had a government placement, you worked in a corporate setting, you worked for a labor union, right? You work for a nonprofit, right? And then we got high level access to interview. So that's what we also learned, is how to question things and question people, right? So that was a core principle of the fellowship. And, that's where we actually met like President Clinton at that time, Al Gore. We met the president of McDonnell Douglas, which is a major airline manufacturer at that time before they got acquired by Boeing. The mayor of St. Louis. I mean, it just gave us incredible access to a lot of leaders where we could learn different leadership styles. So that's what it was, basically a leadership and public, a public fellows program, right? Where you learn leadership from different people. After the choral fellowship, I went to graduate school at Columbia, and I was there for 2 years, but it was during the first internet boom. I was there 96 to 98. And during my second year in graduate school, 2 groups of my friends pitched me to work on startups, right? Because they knew that my parents were entrepreneurs and they knew I was involved. And so they wanted to bounce off ideas. So my friends at that time that were like in investment banking and consulting, they were like, pitching me different ideas. And, I was just giving feedback. And then finally they asked me to help out. So during my second in graduate school, I was, obviously I was busy with school, but I was helping out in these 2 ventures. And at the end of my second year, I picked one, right? And that happened to be View Plus, which is at that time a video on demand company. And that's how I met my co-founder, SparkLabs.
Oh, wow. So
the 2 co-founders for View Plus, when we launched it, it was Jimmy Kim and our CTO, Peter Chang. And that's sort of led me down this path of entrepreneurship and startups. And I haven't looked back since. I really found out from that first startup experience that I really enjoy the whole beginning process, the chaotic mess of, starting with a concept and just launching and building a product, right? And everything that goes in between. I mean, that's where I really learned the hustle, right? That's where you really learn. I mean, not just theoretically from watching my parents facing failure, but you get used to rejection, right? At that time, there weren't as many active, angel firms or angel investors, right? So we were, pitching like hundreds of people to invest in our company, right? And getting so many rejections. And even on the product side, pitching so many companies, begging them to partner with us. Obviously, we wouldn't tell them we're begging, but we're begging them to partner with us. And it was a great learning experience, right? I mean, we put in our own savings. We begged our parents for some money, but it's a story I commonly tell. Like Jimmy at that time, my co-founder, he flew in from Korea because we were developing the technology in Korea. I remember we're on a computer, literally going to credit card sites and applying to like 20 different credit cards, right? So at that time, we were putting, a lot of debt on credit cards too, to build our company.
Wow. Yeah, I love hearing these hustle stories, because when we look at you, Bernard, we're like, man, Bernard's so successful, SparkLabs all over the world. You sent me the deck, I looked through, I'm like, man, there's no way I can compare to Bernard, just hearing the story too about your humble beginnings, your hustle mentality, overcoming rejections. It's a common theme among all first-time founders, And out of curiosity too, like, were there any time in this journey where you're just like, I just wanted to stop, this is too crazy for me, I want to go back to a normal job? And just get accurate timeline too. Like when you first started your first startup, how old were you at the time?
Oh man, I'm blanking out on my age, not on purpose. Wait, no, it was how old was I? 20. Wait. So I was. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking out.
Around.
No, I was in my upper 20s, let's say. Okay. So it was actually 20. Yeah, I was in my upper 20s during the first startup, right? Like around 28. But you were asking about. Wait, I'm sorry. What the question was?
Yeah, I was just asking about like what was the biggest challenge during the first startup, and have you thought about quitting at any point of time? Like going back to like a corporate job.
No, I think I was stubborn, like a lot of entrepreneurs. I mean, we were. There's a funny story because also one of those times when Jimmy came over and we're pitching for investors and partnerships, right? At that time, we didn't. I think we had like a small amount of capital, maybe, right? And we had obviously like credit card debt and everything, and we were fundraising, and after like 6 months in, my dad calls me in, right? And even though I'm an adult at that time, my dad still sort of struck a little fear in me, right? He's also, I'm like 6'1" at that time, whatever. I was like 220, but my dad's also 6 feet, but he's wider. He's actually very built, right? So he has a physically commanding presence, and he calls me in and he's like, Bernard, you've been at this for 6 months. You haven't raised any money yet, right? or barely anything. He's like, business is like poker. You have to know when to quit. Right. And the funny thing is, if you ask my co-founder, Jimmy, he was actually in the other room trying to go to sleep, and he hears this conversation, and he said he couldn't sleep all night because he felt this like weight of my dad's guilt on him. Like he was like rolling around, tossing in bed. Right. He's like, oh man, we have to close. And I remember I told my dad, I'm like, look, Dad, I understand it's fair. You've been, supporting me in this. I'm in a lot of debt, give us 4 more months. Right. And that's basically, and he's like, he tried to push back, but he knew and saw the determination, right, that I had. And then, eventually we closed our, we closed our angel round, right? And that's what sort of led us to the next stage, right? Which was, we closed about 600,000 in angel funding.
Wow.
Right. So that it was definitely a long haul after like almost a year of pounding the pavement. And then we got terms to, it was a combination of things that we were doing at the time, but terms for 33 million.
Wow. That's insane.
That was about a year after the funding, but that was like during like the whole, obviously like internet boom, and, we got this large commitment. But the funny thing is then when we were building our platform, it was a video on demand platform for cable and satellite systems, right? So as background, back then, what we take for granted, like Netflix on the internet, but it was actually even video on demand, like instant viewing on cable boxes was super expensive, right? In the 90s, actually, to build out the infrastructure, it cost almost, let's say, $1 million per home back then, right? So it's super expensive. So we found the intermediate solution where you basically tier it and you stream the content into these set-top boxes with hard drives, right? And this is actually before even, I don't know if you remember TiVo and Replay.
Yeah, I remember that.
Came out, right? And then set-tops actually all of a sudden, they were building them out with hard drives and memory. So we were talking at that time to the leading set-top box manufacturers, General Instrument and Scientific Atlanta. And, we got into their partner program. And initially they told us that their set-tops, this new generation of set-tops with hard drives, right, that could store things, would come out in 6 months, right? Then they extended it to a year plus. So we just got this money, and they're saying that we wouldn't be ready to launch for a year out.
Oh, wow.
right? So we didn't know what to do at the time. We were debating back and forth. I remember like intense debates with my co-founders, Jimmy and Peter. And concurrently, we got an offer to, background is to start the Korea division or Korea entity of a new startup, right? Called Hey Anita. It was a voice portal back in 2000.
Yeah.
And so the backstory on that is, through a common contact, we met these 4 Microsoft execs, right? They're high level guys that left Microsoft to start this voice portal called Hey Anita. And voice was very hot back then, in 2000 even, right? Where even you didn't have mobile, but voice commands was actually, the technology was it's not that much better today in terms of like voice commands, right? But you're doing it through landlines.
Yeah.
So there's companies as Tell Me, Be Vocal, and then eventually Hey Anita. And Hey Anita back then, they actually had a term sheet from Sequoia.
Wow.
But in 2099, a little history is that Masayoshi-san at that time was the second richest man in the world. And he was worth like something 60 billion or something from his investment in Yahoo. So he put a big bet into Yahoo early on. Yahoo blew up and he became the second richest man after Bill Gates. So these guys wanted SoftBank money through our mutual contact who actually knew that. So my co-founder, Jimmy, his god uncle was very close with Matsuyoshi-san. So Jimmy said, fine, I could do the introduction. So he introduced them. And then these guys got a term sheet from SoftBank for, let's say it was like north of 30 million. Right? They came back to us and they said, hey, we want to launch concurrently in Asia. Can you guys do Hey Anita Korea? At that time, we're like, oh no, we have our own we have our own startup. We just got money. It's okay, right? And then during that time, we had that going back to the set-top box story, we're like, oh crap, we can't launch our product until at least a year out, right? So we're like, should we take this offer from the Hey Anita guys? Right? And then we went back and forth. And then finally, we just gave in and said, fine, we'll take it. So that's how I actually, as an adult, moved to Korea for the very first time, right? Since I was an infant to do our second startup. The Korean entity was separately backed by SoftBank Korea, right? Because the US guys were backed by SoftBank Japan and the US at that time. And then we were backed by SoftBank Korea. And then that was our second startup. Same team, Jimmy, Peter, and I, we were the co-founders of this. And then we were launching this new voice portal in the South Korean market.
Wow. That's quite the story and the journey. I'm glad things started to play out and work out. I think the hardest thing with most founders is like, you can't see that light at the end of the tunnel when you're struggling. And I think the crazy fact about your story is a lot of things happen in a very short amount of time, as long as you stay mentally ready and you see opportunity all the time. So hats off to you and your partners.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of hard because there's obviously a lot of chance or luck involved at that time. Where if we decided to fold, even a couple months before, maybe we wouldn't have raised even that first 600,000 angel money, right? Or if by chance, we didn't help out these Hey Anita guys, and it wouldn't have led to this other opportunity in Korea, right? Yeah. Or a lot of things. I mean, sometimes it's by these chance moments and calls or meetings, right? And you just have to sort of stick with it, right?
Right. Yeah.
I feel like when those happen, it's like the universe trying to help you out. It's like whatever you want to do, it's like, here you go. It comes all at once, Yeah.
What was that transition like? Just, being in Korea and
I know I want to hear about that because SparkLabs in Korea right now.
Yeah.
And it's pretty crazy.
Well, my time living in Korea as an adult, it was definitely adjustment because I mentioned, I grew up in Chicago, so I'm definitely more, I would say, American in my base thinking, right? Versus I would say if you grew up in LA, right? Or New York even, right? So, and I was a suburban kid, right? So when I went to Chicago, definitely being very American, I didn't like some of the cultural norms there, right? It's as a background, like Korea is definitely a strict Confucian hierarchy, similar to Japan, right? It's interesting because, where Confucianism was born in China, that hierarchy was almost erased because of communism, right? But so you had these, sort of strict social norms, like if someone's a year older than you. I mean, luckily I didn't, I spoke like baby Korean and I still do, but, if someone's a year older than you, then you sort of show that respect, right? Yeah. And you show that, and you speak to them in the honorific.
Yeah.
So when I went there was already some, friends or acquaintances that I knew that moved to Korea because the first wave, I would say in the 90s, a lot of Korean Americans went there to teach English, right? But in the late 90s, it was a shift where a lot of white collar professionals started coming into the Asia or the Korean market, like Korea, Hong Kong, Japan, right? A lot of the banks and consulting firms, they had Asian Americans. Now they could transplant to Asia, right? So that was an interesting time. And so even my friends that were fluent in Korean, they told me that they would speak in English, right? To level the playing field because they were younger than most of their either clients or counterparts, right? And so initially I would say I was resistant because I saw, and I still sort of do see this Confucian hierarchy as I call it the crutch for the weak, right? It's not just even age, it's definitely, and it's not even spoken about sometimes. And I think some, I would say ignorant Korean Americans sort of try to defend it, but there's a lot of sexism involved too, right? And it's still there where they sort of belittle the women in the professional field. So that's why overall, I just call it a crutch for the weak, right? Why do you have to lean on something, on this hierarchy, right? To sort of make yourself either feel better or have this position of power over someone else.
Right.
Some of it is cultural, and I'm not saying everyone abuses it, right? But there's definitely abuse, right? And I think everyone has insecurities, and when you have these insecurities and you have this power, I think you leverage it at times, right? So that's something that I definitely was against, but I had to adjust, right, and not be so brash because when you're younger, you're definitely more brash and confrontational, at least, or I was, right? And I was like, oh man, they have to earn my respect, right? Like they can't like talk like that or whatever, But then I think I settled down and tried to, be more in flow of the culture, but not accept the things that I disagree with.
So, right.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to kind of highlight you starting SparkLabs Korea back in 2012. What you're doing there is so inspirational to me because something that I want to do sometime later on in my career. So when I'm talking to you about this, I'm like visualizing myself, like where do I want to be, So I want to ask you like how did the inspiration behind SparkLab Korea come about, and how do you guys find so much success globally? You guys were invested into a lot of different countries, a lot of different companies. Like, what was the formula like, and where did this idea come from?
Yeah, and we've heard from like previous podcasts too that it's kind of like the YC of Korea, right? And so, kind of want to hear about how that inspiration came about.
Yeah.
Well, it was actually started by my co-founder Hanju Lee. The idea, right? So Hanji at that time, he started Hostway, which was a top 5 global hosting company. And several years before they launched Hostway Korea. So he was literally going like 2 weeks Chicago, 2 weeks Seoul, back and forth. And also during that period, he started angel investing more into Korean startups. So he was flying through San Francisco and he asked to meet for lunch. I said, yeah, sure. And it was in, I think, March of 2012, where he said, hey, I think it's a good time to start a Y Combinator of Korea. Why don't we do it together? I just said, I'm pretty busy with my startup. Why don't we, I could advise you. He's like, no, we got to do it together. I just said, okay, well, you have your company, I have my company. So we have to find someone else to run it. And I just said, I think we need a third. So I said, let me ask Jimmy. He said, yeah. Why don't you go ask Jimmy? I said, yeah, if Jimmy does it, then I'm definitely in. So later that day, I call, once Jimmy wakes up in Seoul, I call him and said, hey, Hanju has this idea. He wants to start a YC of South Korea. And Jimmy was hilarious because he was at first like, oh man, I don't know if Korean entrepreneurs are good to work with. I was like, why are you such a hater? You're Korean. He's like, oh, I don't know. Is there enough good startups? I'm like, dude, I was like, if Techstars started in Boulder with like, or Denver, greater Denver area with like 1 million people, Seoul has 25 million people. I'm sure there's enough startups. And he's like, oh, I don't know. I was like, look, you could do it. You'll just be part-time. Just come in once a month. You speak a little here and there, and that's it. He's like, oh, fine. Right. So that's how the idea came about. And then, that first month, I remember just setting the groundwork, right? One of the things obviously accelerators have is mentors, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember emailing like 50 close friends and, friends are actually acquaintances in Silicon Valley. And, that's how we initially started getting momentum because we got very sort of high profile mentors. We knew that in Asia, especially because I mentioned this Confucian hierarchy, sometimes age is a factor, right? Mm-hmm. So when I looked at the other programs, if they had mentors, they have a mix of high to mid-level managers or whatnot. And I thought initially for Korea, because they're so fixated on this age thing, we had to get all senior people, right? So that's why we got a lot of successful entrepreneurs or senior execs at tech companies as mentors. And then Jimmy, it was interesting. Jimmy, had an idea. He's like, hey, why don't you try to target some of like these, big names in tech? Mm-hmm. And I just said, well, I don't know. I didn't see any accelerators with like advisors or anything. He's like, no, let's do it. It's good marketing. Right? So I said, okay, fine. So, that's when, I started contacting some people. And luckily at that time, my wife was at Google. So she was at Google for 9 years. Mm-hmm. 2 out of the 9, she sat actually right next to Vint Cerf,
wow.
One of the fathers of the internet. Mm. And so I asked Vin, I'm like, hey, this is Christine's husband. We're still launching this accelerator. Can you be an advisor? Right. Mm-hmm. He said, sure. So I was very lucky and very fortunate that he liked my wife. Right?
Wow.
So Vint came on as an advisor and then it just sort of rolled from there. I met Mark Cuban years before at a technology conference, got Mark Cuban on board. Ray Ozzie, who was CTO of Microsoft at that time, he came on board, Tom Peters, and it just started rolling. And then in the fall, we launched the program. Our target was small, like 6 companies, right? And it was interesting because there was this range even of bootstrap. Even for our first batch, it was bootstrap to a company, a startup that raised a $3 million Series A. Mm-hmm. Right. So majority of the companies actually raised 500,000 to 3 million. And they all wanted to be part of this network. And our positioning was to help Korean startups go global, right? And during that time, it was very competitive already in Korea. Even in 2012, there was, at least 20 accelerators there. Korea was already a vibrant ecosystem, right? But through, I think, our positioning of helping companies go global and the fact that all the founders, we did our own startups or we're doing our own startups, right? That created this initial affinity. So if you ask, what's sort of our secret sauce, I mean, it's not a secret sauce. We're very open about it, is that all the core partners did our own startups, right? Because we were entrepreneurs. So you naturally have this affinity, right, with the people that go through your program, right? Yeah. And you could tell your war stories. I could tell about only my failures, but then obviously my other co-founders, Jimmy and Hanju, they could talk about their successes and failures. Right. And that was sort of like a core tenet of SparkLabs, is helping these startups go global. Right. And also just helping them, knowing how to help them out. Right. Regardless of what stage they're at, because we went through it all. Right. And so that's how the success sort of rolled about. I would say it took a couple years, but by 2015, we became clearly, I think at that time, known as like the leading accelerator in South Korea. And then we figured we could replicate this model. And that's how we grew. Like, we launched in Taipei. I would say Edgar Chu has done a great job with our support. And it's clearly the leading accelerator in Taiwan now. And in Australia, our SparkLabs Cultivate, which is a ag tech, food tech accelerator, we're clearly the leader, I would say, in that market too. So it's grown in terms of just reputation and branding. But also I would say, metrics, our investment performance is I would say top 10% in the world. And also even in terms of like shallow marketing, like, Korea, now we host the largest startup demo day in the world. Like before the pandemic, like 3,000 people would attend our half day demo days in South Korea, Taiwan. This past November, they just had 1,000 in-person demo day.
Wow.
It's also in Taiwan. It's the must-see event, one of the must-see events in Taiwan, and then in Australia too. So I think we learned how to not only run an accelerator program, but also help build out these startup ecosystems, within these markets.
I love that.
Wow.
Out of curiosity, did your startup accelerator inspire the startup Korean drama that was really popular on Netflix?
Yeah, I don't know if you know, but we were actually the official consultants.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I don't know why I remember seeing some similar logos to your deck that you sent me with the Korean drama I was watching. So I wanted to ask this question.
Yeah, because I've heard that their drama is actually based off of a true accelerator.
Yeah.
Like an actual accelerator.
Yeah. So if you look, I mean, they do flashes, but they actually have pictures of our actual demo day.
Yes.
Yeah, they actually had more, but they, I think for copyright concerns, they took it down. They actually showed like 20 plus of our company accelerator logo, but they changed the names and made it like fake names. You could tell it's our portfolio companies.
Yeah.
And then we had some product placement. So, taking a step back. So the year before they started showing it on Netflix and in Korea, they approached our partner, my partner and colleague, Eugene Kim, who is the managing partner for SparkLabs Korea. They asked him to consult. So Eugene and about 4 or 5 others from the SparkLabs Korea team started consulting the startup K-drama.
Yeah.
And then it led to other things like it got product placement for one of our companies called N Things.
Oh.
So if you remember in the VC's apartment, there's these
oh yes.
there's these oh my gosh, why am I blanking out? The smart farming plants, right?
Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah. So that's actually our portfolio company's product.
Wow.
Right. And then one of our venture partners, Channel Park, who's a former LA Dodgers pitcher. So he was actually, in the drama. And then before COVID hit, though, they also invited our SparkLabs Korea team to be on the set, but they had to cancel it. Right? So I was guessing maybe Eugene or someone might have gotten a short, a brief cameo or something. I mean, who knows? But yeah, so we were the official consultants for it, and then they definitely gave various I would say hat tips to us during the show. So
I knew it, and I had to confirm this podcast, and we confirmed it. Thank you, Bernard.
So awesome.
Yeah, and for you guys who don't know what the drama we're talking about, a startup. It's a Korean drama on Netflix. Check it out. It's
really good. Yeah, it is really good. We really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So we know, you all started knowing how to operate the accelerator. We know how you got the mentors and advisors. Can you talk a little bit about the actual startups? Like, what did you guys typically look for in a startup? And like, how did you do outreach? Did you wait for inflow, or did you kind of do your own outreach and scout for them? And what was like the biggest difference between startups in Korea as opposed to America?
And to add on to that too, when you started the initial funding, was this like self-funded, or did you guys raise a large money to begin with to start the accelerator?
So we structured it as a fund. So it's a small fund. So most accelerator funds, I would say, are very small funds. You don't need that much capital. Excuse me. As background, I would say globally, most funds range from 2 million to 10.
Okay.
Right. The carried interest is the same as any VC fund, where it's 80-20, right? You pay back the principal, then you split the profits. 80% goes to investors, 20% goes to the team that runs the fund. Accelerator funds are a little different in a sense where usually because it's a small fund, there's a lot of more operating costs for the accelerator, right? And it's more intensive than if it's like a regular VC fund because it's more program centered. So 50% of the capital raise goes to operations, right? It's like pay the staff, demo day, bring in speakers, et cetera. Right. So that's how we did initially raise a $3 million fund for SparkLabs Korea, right? And then we started investing, actually, I forgot the exact numbers. I think we were like YC, we invested 25K and then we upped it to 50 and now it's like 100,000 for up to 6%, right? The initial, you'll hear this from like, I think any sort of VC, it's usually through personal network, right? And referral. And that's actually how we started out. A lot of the companies, we did do a PR blitz in Korea and then we opened up the applications, but the strongest companies actually came from our network, right? So an example is like one of them is first batch was Nodi. It was an ed tech company, and that was actually referred by one of my friends. Another company, Ablar. It was funny at that time. This well-known serial entrepreneur in South Korea. He asked me to be advisor. His name is Chester Rowe. Right? He actually was the first Korean startup. He co-founded the first Korean startup that got acquired by Google. And so he asked me to advisor and just said, hey, we're starting this new accelerator in a fund, so we can't take outside positions. He's like, why don't you be a part of it? Right? Then I could help you out. And so that's how we recruited that company for the first batch. Right. So it was initially through personal referral, but now as our, reputation and branding grew, we do get like sometimes up to or over 400,000 applications, right? I'm sorry, 400. Sorry, not 400,000. 400. I'm sorry, 400. Okay, 400 applications. Sorry, I missed.
100 people reviewing that.
More than that.
400,000.
No, not 4. I'm sorry, I misspoke. So 400 applications for each batch, right? Which is twice a year. But then we also, that doesn't come through the online system. We have all these personal referrals, right? So now it's a mix of, sort of this accelerator machine and then referrals. And then we also get even not just direct referrals on our own network, but referrals now from the mentors.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the great thing too, is that as the mentors get involved and they love obviously helping out new entrepreneurs, they also like the program. Hopefully when they do like the program, they'll refer, startups that they know of. So it all happens once you start building out that ecosystem. And that's what we found out. It's a really interesting thing to see. And it's exciting when we launch a new accelerator is that we definitely expand the network like tenfold, right? Because when we launch a new accelerator, like in Taiwan, we had Edgar, right? And then it was excuse to Edgar and I and others. We recruited all these mentors that wanted to help out Taiwanese startups. And then we, I got my friends like Charles and Kai Huang, the Guitar Hero brothers to be on the advisory board. I asked through a friend, Steve Chen, co-founder of YouTube. So he was initially one of the advisors and then it just expanded from there. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Is there any notable startups that you can mention that you guys invest into over the years? Or you're like, whoa, it totally blew up that we all know about?
I think, it's mainly in Asia. So most of them, I'm not sure if you know from here. I mean, there's Mimibox that has done well. They're in their first batch, right? They raised $126 million Series C.
Nice.
And then Johnson & Johnson, did a small Series D of 35 million. And they're on a good track. They're not as visible because they're the white label provider for Sephora, for key beauty products.
Yeah.
But their product brand is called Kaja, which is the number one actual brand for Sephora for I think 15 to 25-year-olds. Right. So it's done very well, and that's tracking well. There's different ones that are, I guess, like known in each market, in Korea or Taiwan or Australia. I'm not sure if you recognize them.
We might, but our podcast is very international as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
So naming these brands get people all over the world really excited to hear about them. Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's Wanted. It's actually doing well. It's a job site, right? In the Korean and Japanese market. I'm just trying to think. I'm like blanking.
No worries.
Like if you watch like YouTube stuff, like Asian Boss was also.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. They're one of our portfolio companies. They went through our program.
Was 88 a part of your portfolio, and Taco app? Taco app?
Taco we invested, yeah. And then 88 was actually on our seed fund side.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Right. So, we launched also the venture capital fund on the other half. Mm-hmm. Right. So, we invested out of our US fund into 88 Rising. Mm-hmm. That was interesting because, when Jason Ma pitched me, I don't think he was he didn't know what to expect. Right. And then I like the vision, and I'm not one that gets really excited on these pitches. Right? It's not like anything purposeful. I don't try to do a poker face, but I just don't get emotionally excied.
Yeah.
Right. So I was like, oh, this is a great app. So I just said, hey, I'm going to introduce you to a couple of our, LPs, our investors in our funds.
Yeah.
And then so in their seed round, I did bring two of our LPs into it. One of them was GDP Ventures out of Indonesia. Mm-hmm. And then GDP actually led their Series C round.
Wow.
They raised a $20 million Series C. Mm-hmm. So, we definitely, if we obviously like the founders, mm-hmm. right, and as we continue to see them perform, we bring them closer into our network. So
I love that. Appreciate the help and hospitality that you have for the community. And I guess one of the second to last question I had is, it's going to be a pretty big question, Bernard. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to apologize ahead. But what is your why and your vision of why you do everything? What's the reason why you wake up every morning, and just why do you do the things you do? Because you look at you were so successful already, and you've done so many different things. You impact so many different lives. But I want to understand, what is your why of doing everything that you do?
Well, taking a step back, I don't know if I think I'm that successful yet.
We think you're very successful, by the way.
Yeah, you are successful.
Okay. I think I just found what I'd like to do. And I'm not one of those that believes that you always have to sort of follow your passion, right?
Yeah.
Maybe towards the later end of your career you do, but I think early on, you definitely take sacrifices, right? But I think I was fortunate enough to, that I did find what I liked, right? In terms of sort of the startup creation. And also what I didn't mention is one thing that Jimmy and I did also during all those startup years is help other entrepreneurs, right? We always gave free advice to other entrepreneurs, like what to do and what not to do, right? And tell them our war stories. So when we launched SparkLabs, we joked around, oh, this is what we're doing, but we're just adding a check. We're adding a $50K check out of our accelerator or $1 million check out of one of our VC funds. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what keeps me excited, right? Because I enjoy just helping other people, right? And it just happens that, I'm writing a check for them, but, I was already doing it for 20 years for free, right? So it's just something that I think I enjoy. I enjoy helping them out. I enjoy them seeing their own sort of excitement when they hit their sort of stages of success, right? But I'm also, I understand even the downturns, because startup life is a lot of ups and downs, right? It's not all about, basking in the glory or being on, Inc. magazine or Forbes or whatever, right? Most of it is actually, very stressful. Right. It's a lot of rejection. It's a lot of failure. Right. And it's a lot of fears because, even when I was going through my third startup, when I moved to the Bay Area, it was when our kids were very young.
Yeah.
Right. And it was a lot of risk. And then it stressed out my wife a lot, who at that time wasn't a startup person, you know, very much valued security, right? And to be frank, it did create tension in our marriage because, you know, there's so much stress and uncertainty involved, right? So since I went through that all, I definitely sympathize with our entrepreneurs and founders, right? And I could, you know, convey and tell them at least, you know, what I went through or what I was thinking, right? Every person and every individual is different in terms of how they react and take to stress. I definitely think I'm an outlier because I really don't get that stressed, but I do get stressed when my wife's stressed. So I learned that that's an important factor.
All right, let me write that down.
Important factor.
Very important.
Even if you're not as stressed as you want to show, you should show that you're very stressed.
We also know your wife is also a founder now too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, she is. So yeah, surprisingly, she took the leap over a year ago to launch a autonomous driving startup for mass transit and the greater space. So
did that affect the startup, the Korean drama, the autonomous driving at the very end of the series?
I think some people said they might have gotten that idea.
Okay.
So, yeah, we don't. Well, because it's funny because I guess the naming again, I speak like baby Korean. But the name in the show could be interpreted as the name of actually my wife's company, which is Blue Space.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, for you guys listening, this is spoiler alert. Apologize.
So many similarities.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No more spoilers. No more spoilers. Some people haven't watched it yet.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Bernard, we have one last question for you. And that is, what one advice could you give to an aspiring entrepreneur? If you could just choose one.
And that advice is someone that you give back to yourself when you first started your journey since day one.
Okay, let me think about this. Advice. I would say, okay, one thing. Well, this is more critique on myself, though. I'm not sure. I'm just thinking out loud. Like one thing, like looking back, like I think I would have been more thorough in some of my planning for the startups, right? Definitely pay attention to all the details, right? And then I would say also just, enjoy the moment more, right? Whether it is good or bad, definitely be more self-reflective and learn from the situations that you're in, right? Because everything becomes a blur when, in life and when you're doing a startup, right? And so sometimes you sort of miss those learning moments, right? That could maybe make your next startup or next stage of life, better, more efficient, more enjoyable, right? I think sometimes, especially myself, but I think people in general, sometimes you just are in this blur of life, right? And you just don't pause and think about either yourself or how you could react, right? Or how you could improve yourself or how you could treat people better, right? And those are some things. I'm not a person that regrets, I would say, my past or look back too much, right? But I think in some of those moments, when I do look back, I wish maybe I didn't blow up at my co-founder at one time, or I didn't make a rash decision. I should have thought about it better, right? I should have been more thoughtful to my wife, right? Or things like that. Even still now, it's hard to pause, I think, right? Because we are relatively young in the venture space. We're 8 years in, right? We're still running at 100 miles per hour, right? I'm still working 80 plus hours a week.
Oh, no.
Right. And, we're still trying to build this firm, and we are trying to build a firm beyond ourselves, right? We're trying to build our SparkLabs for something to last, 10, 20, 30 years beyond this. Right. So it's not just about our immediate gain. And that's why we're very cautious about, I would say, our reputation and how we treat people and how we treat our founders. Right. Because we've seen some short-term firms just looking for their, to cash out and then they move on.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think the core founders, and myself, we've built a very strong vision in terms of what we want to accomplish over I would say the next 10 years. And then we want to pass the torch to the next generation. So.
Wow.
It's very insightful.
Thank you for that, Bernard.
Yeah.
Thank you for what you do. Very inspirational. We keep hearing SparkLabs come up time and time again when we talk to other entrepreneurs, especially in Korea. Mm-hmm. And just watching the Korean drama, like, it's definitely SparkLabs. Just confirm it.
Yes.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, Bernard, how can our listeners find out more about you and SparkLabs online?
Yeah, they could go to sparklabsgroup.com, or they could go to any of our sites from sparklabsgroup.com or sparklabs@co.kr.
Mm-hmm.
Go to our websites, and if they, if your listeners want to contact me and ask for advice or pitch their startup, they could email me directly. It's bernard@sparklabsglobal.com.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Bernard, and be careful what you wish for.
You might get tons of emails tomorrow morning.
All right. Thank you, Bernard, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Bernard.
Okay. Thanks, Maggie.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to the show.
We would like to get to the top 10 on iTunes, so be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We release an episode every single Wednesday, so stay tuned.
Thank you guys so much.